You know, whether you've bought a coffee, accepted a new job, or even just clicked I agree on a website, you've made a contract. Today, we're going to break down the legal scaffolding behind the promises we make every single day, a lot of times without even thinking about it.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to see that contracts are literally all around us in places you might not expect. Then we'll get into the secret recipe, the 4 essential ingredients every legit contract needs. After that, we'll look at what happens when good contracts go bad. And finally, we'll walk through a contract's life cycle, from the moment it's born to the moment it ends. All right, first things first, let's just get one major myth out of the way. When you hear contract, you probably picture some dusty 100-page document with a lot of fine print, right? Well, the truth is, contracts are a fundamental part of our daily lives, and most of them are never ever written down. Now, really, just take a second and think about it. That bus ticket you bought, contract. The coffee you ordered, contract. Even streaming this explainer involves an agreement. The law is smart enough to know that promises and agreements don't just happen on paper. So contracts basically come in 2 main flavors: express and implied. An express contract is the obvious one. All the terms are spelled out, either out loud or in writing. Simple. But an implied contract, that's where it gets interesting. These are formed entirely by our actions. Think about hailing a cab. You get in, you give an address. You never say, I promise to pay you the fare. But your actions scream it, and the law hears it loud and clear. A contract is formed without a single word about payment. We can also slice this another way by looking at the exchange itself. Most contracts are bilateral. That's a fancy word for a two-way street. It's a promise for a promise. I promise to pay, and you promise to paint my house. But then you have these other creatures called unilateral contracts. This is a promise in exchange for an action. That lost dog poster with a $100 reward, that's a perfect example. The owner is promising to pay, but nobody is promising to go look for the dog. The contract only springs to life when someone actually performs the action, when they walk up to the door with the dog. Only then is the owner legally bound to pay up. So, what's the magic line between a casual promise you make to a friend and a legally binding contract? Well, it all boils down to a very specific recipe. And you need every single one of these ingredients, or the whole thing falls apart. What's in this recipe? Every valid contract has to have these 4 essential things: capable parties, mutual consent, a lawful purpose, and something lawyers call consideration. These are the absolute non-negotiables. And for some really important deals, like buying a house, the law throws in a 5th requirement. It has to be in writing. Let's break each of these down real quick. First up, the people involved have to be legally capable of making a deal. The law pretty much assumes most adults are, but it puts up a protective barrier for certain groups it sees as vulnerable. Think minors or people who aren't mentally capable of understanding what they're signing. Next, you need mutual consent. This is what you might hear called a meeting of the minds. It's really simple. One person has to make a clear offer, and the other person has to clearly accept that exact offer. You both have to be on the exact same wavelength about what the deal is. This one's kind of a no-brainer, right? The purpose of the contract has to be legal. You can't have a legally binding contract to do something illegal. An agreement to rob a bank, for instance? It's not just that a court won't enforce it. In the eyes of the law, that agreement is void. It's a ghost. It never existed. And finally, there has to be consideration. Now, this sounds a little formal, but all it means is that each person has to get something of value. It's the what's in it for me part of the equation. It could be money, sure, but it could also be a service, an item, or even a promise not to do something. It's the price paid for the promise, and it's what separates a real bargain from just a one-sided gift. Okay, but we all know that life is messy. What happens when an agreement seems to have all the right ingredients, but something is still fundamentally wrong with it? Let's dive into what happens when a contract has a fatal flaw and how the law sorts out these broken promises. So first off, you have a void agreement. This thing was basically dead on arrival. It isn't just a broken contract. It was never a contract to begin with. It has zero legal effect right from the start. That illegal contract we talked about, totally void. Now, a voidable contract is different. This one's kind of in limbo. It's technically a valid contract, but there's an escape hatch for one of the parties. This usually happens when someone was tricked, defrauded, or pressured into the deal. The person who is wronged gets to decide. They can either go through with the contract or hit the eject button and cancel the whole thing. And finally, there's the unenforceable contract. Now, this one is tricky. The agreement itself might be perfectly valid, but some legal technicality stops a court from enforcing it. The classic example is the statute of limitations. That's just a legal deadline. If someone breaks the contract but you wait too long to sue them, your valid contract just became unenforceable. You snooze, you lose. And this gets to a really crucial idea. For that meeting of the minds to be real, the consent has to be genuine. If someone was tricked with lies, forced into a deal, or if both of you were completely mistaken about what you were even agreeing on, well, that's not real consent. These are the big red flags that can give someone that escape hatch and make a contract voidable. All right, let's bring it home and talk about the end of the road. Every single contract has a life cycle. It eventually has to end, whether that's because everything went perfectly, it got changed, or it completely fell apart. This is called the discharge of a contract. But what if you need to pass the torch to someone else? Well, you've got two main options. With an assignment, you can transfer your rights to someone else. But be careful, you could still be on the hook if they mess up. A novation, on the other hand, is a clean break. It's a total substitution where a new person takes over your spot completely, and you get to walk away free and clear. The huge difference here is liability.
So, how does the story finally end? Well, in a perfect world, it ends with full performance. Everybody does exactly what they promised. But, life happens. A contract can also end because both people just agree to call it quits, or because some crazy unforeseen event makes it literally impossible to finish. And sometimes it ends because one person breaks the deal and the other just decides it's not worth fighting over and moves on.
So why? Why do we have this entire complex legal world built around our promises? This quote absolutely nails it. Our memories are terrible, they're faulty, they're incomplete. A contract is our defense against that. It takes a fleeting promise and turns it into something solid and certain, making sure everyone is clear on what was agreed. So the next time you click agree, you'll know exactly what makes that promise stick.